Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Nirmanon. I'll be doing a gameplay commentary over some Battlefield Bad Company 2. I thought this would be a great opportunity to kind of showcase some different gameplay, considering that many of you guys have been requesting different content, but I'd also like to showcase something that's a little bit more interesting. Maybe I have a little bit more topics, mainly subjected to, and I think it's just a good mix-up, considering that Call of Duty has been pretty prevalent for the last couple of months. So, I guess with that in mind, guys, let's jump right into the commentary. I'm going to be mainly talking today about Battlefield Bad Company 2 versus Battlefield 3. And in regards to exactly how it's subjected, I'm not going to be talking about the benefits that it brought and how different in the opinions of many players. I'm going to be talking about the innovation and how people have been accustomed to subjected things that maybe are not exactly there as much as people would like to agree or disagree upon. So more or less, the commentary will be subjected to matters that people or the community has basically founded their opinions on. So, I guess we'll see how this works out. Of course, as a disclaimer, I'm not trying to be all-knowing in this commentary. I'm not going to be telling you guys everything about Battlefield because there's just too much information, there's too much to talk about, and I don't have enough time for it. So that's why you guys can come into play and jump into the comments and let me know about information maybe I missed, and we can have a good conversation, and hopefully everything will work out. With that in mind, guys, let's jump into it. Battlefield Bad Company 2, I'm going to be talking about the pros and cons of it and what it brought to the table. Of course, pros were so many. They brought so many cool, innovative thoughts. They brought so much effort put forward, which is a good thing by a company. I know a lot of people look at DICE as this evil corporation that's here to take over the planet and wants to just make terrible video games and all this obscure shit that people just have a crazy imagination for. I guess that's what the human mind does to us. We all have a different opinion on subjected matters. But with that in mind, guys, they brought with it basically destructibility, players. Obviously, the player count has been increasing ever since the standpoint, and that's a good innovative thought that I think many would agree upon. With that in mind, obviously, they brought with it air combat, vehicle combat, infantry combat, large maps on the largest scale that we had ever seen at this time period. Granted, if you relate this to other games, maybe it's not as big as it once was, but it's still ridiculously larger than what Call of Duty upholds. And I guess that's just a kind of poke at Call of Duty, but more or less, I play both titles. With that in mind, there's so much more broad information. I mean, you could talk about the spectrum of the customization that was basically enabled during the time period. You could talk about the balancement that they had. Of course, not to the highest degree. There were issues, and we'll be talking about those in the cons shortly. But it also brought with it an array of just different combat that we had not commonly seen. I think many of us are probably used to the drop shotter, jump shotters in Call of Duty. Well, that stuff doesn't exactly work in Battlefield. It's not something that's very common to many players. For one, they usually have a penalty that basically gives you a slap on the wrist and tells you not to be a bitch, and that's kind of what they do. Battlefield's very known for having a very spoken mind, and they really want to press on to this tactical, situational awareness to many players. That's something that they try to implement. Of course, Battlefield is not a military simulator. It does not make you a killing machine, and many people will obviously know this, but you have those crazies out there that are just crazies, but it's about as realistic as you can possibly get to an online service without really exposing it to different circumstances. Arma 2, for example, or the Arma series, is really military based. They have very strict rules to what you can and cannot do, and that's great, but that also takes away from the experience. If there was not modifications for the game, I don't think it would be too common. So that's just an example. Now let's jump into the cons that it upholds. During its time period, there were many flaws that it upheld. I mean, we could talk about the bugs that it had that never got fixed. You guys will see one of them at the very end of the video when I actually lose the game, but it says I won. And it makes no sense to many players. It was very common. I remember seeing that a lot. You could talk about custom balancement. That would be the M60 was super overpowered. It was so overused to the point where it was game-breaking. It ruined the experience for many players. If you were a new player, you would get killed by this gun all the time by the highest levels in the game. And the leveling system was not the highest in the world either. It wasn't that hard to reach max level. It was very common to see these guys in every single lobby, and usually they would be stacked on a team. Now, of course, Battlefield's not a game exactly too friendly to more than 4 players. You can usually only play with a squad unless you want to have your friends join your server, which is something you can do. And on Xbox, you have a benefit of actually having the party chat. Unfortunately, PlayStation does not have that. And that's kind of a problem. I guess you could mess with the VoIP and stuff like that, but it just makes sense to have everybody in a common chat, and it's a little bit more friendly to your friends talking to friends instead of having some miscreant child yelling some obscure shit, and that's something that was very accustomed in Battlefield as well. I remember very detailed with the Bluetooth microphones. Those were infamous in lobbies. But guys, there was a lot of problems that were in the game, and I don't want you guys to really look at this as I'm ragging on the game, because I think it's an infamous game, and it definitely pushed the market in a very positive direction. It sold millions of copies. DLC did okay. I mean, DLC was DLC back then, but I think more players are accustomed to DLC now than they were maybe a few years ago. And it's just something, I guess, that the community as a baseline has basically been accustomed to, of buying new content. So in regards to, other complication and issues, I mean, there was a lot of balancement stuff that they had to work on. Patches were not very prevalent. We barely ever saw them, to be honest with you guys. And it was unfortunate. Customer support was very terrible. I remember my brother actually got corrupted data, and they didn't even know how to fix it. They didn't really care. They appointed you to an EA form to hopefully have other players fix your problem for them. And, it was some terrible customer support, but since then, I think they've become a little bit more accepting of helping you, and that's where we'll jump into Battlefield 3. Battlefield 3 also brought with it much better movement. The movement in Bad Company 2 was horrifically bad. It was so sluggish. Like, go back and play it. I promise you guys, it will not be what you once thought. And I'm not saying that in regards to the gameplay, but in regards to the movement, the sprinting is horrific. The movement is terrible. You feel like you're just this huge guy that cannot move. And I know it's more realistic considering that you wear a lot of armor in a military. You're not running around in Call of Duty going balls deep to every circumstance. But it was a problem. It took away from the experience. Battlefield 3, of course, brought with it player count beyond comparison. On the PC, consoles are a little outdated. I think many of us know that. And that's something that's a problem. I think the graphics in Battlefield 3 are far superior, but at a certain point, you do lose the ability to have more destructibility. The destructibility in Battlefield 3, don't get me wrong, is amazing. It's beyond comparison. It beats a lot of titles that don't even have it. Many of you guys know the subjected titles. But with that in mind, guys, there are different issues that really arise from Battlefield 3. Many players have given it this reputation for not being fixed and having the worst customer support. But, I think DICE does what they need to do. There are a lot of problems that still exist in Battlefield 3. Don't let me tell you wrong. Don't let me try to tell you that it's a perfect game, because it's not. There's a lot of balancement issues that still align, and Battlefield, Bad Company 2 had the best or the better of the two in regards to the actual ability to have a more balanced system. And I'm talking about the medics and the snipers and all that fun stuff, or the more or less the titles of the selected categories, which would be players. I think Battlefield 3 also brought with it a lot of good things. We talked about graphics, we've talked about the air combat has been modified significantly. The maps have grown so much larger. You have the tank battles, more vehicles, customizations a little bit more, but you can't get too crazy because then you start making it into a game that's not Battlefield 3, I guess you could say, because they try to work with companies that are more or less on a military basis. They use a lot of weapons that we're familiar with. I mean, many of us know what the American-made weapons are. Many of us know the F-2000, and the list goes on. Those are very common weapons that Battlefield has used, and Call of Duty and other games that are more subjected to those centralized points. But I guess what I'm really trying to say, guys, is that, they're great titles. They bring with it so much strength, so much power, and many players buy the titles every single year because they're amazing. They are trying to take Call of Duty's crown. Will that ever happen? It's hard to say. It's kind of hard to push on to a title that is so, I guess, dedicated to the military tactics, the ability for using your mental capacity to really press on to a crowd that, is more used to a run-and-gun style. Battlefield is not that. Many of us have found that out if you jump from Call of Duty to Battlefield. And if you've gone from either or, it's a different circumstance. Now, I guess in regards to really what I think, which title took the crown, I think they're at completely different baselines. There is no clear winner. There is no winner in any circumstance because they're great in both circumstances. They're just a little out of the dates. If you go play Bad Company 2, you're going to miss Battlefield 3 customization. If you play Battlefield 3, you're going to miss selected things in Bad Company 2. And I guess that's where I stand, guys. So I appreciate you guys watching the video. I look forward to your comments in the comments below. And with that in mind, guys, I'll see you in the next installment. This is going to be NMO, and I'll be signing out, guys. Peace.